Der Untertan, the subject, Man of Straw. The first full book version of Heinrich Mann's novel was published not in German, but in Russian. After serialization in a St. Petersburg journal in 1914, the book version appeared there in 1915. In Germany, the novel, which was largely written between the years 1912 and 1914, could not appear in book form until December 1918 because of censorship issues, of course. Censorship was not lifted until December 1918. A Russian reviewer of the book found it necessary to point out that the author Heinrich Mann, Mann, was not to be confused with the more sensitive and subtle Thomas Mann. Now, it's an interesting comment because it points to the existence of a cultivated Russian reading public that would be familiar with the rather slim work at this point of Thomas Mann, but not with the immense body of work that Heinrich Mann had already produced at this time. No two brothers, I think, who went into the same profession would have been more different than Thomas and Heinrich. Heinrich was born in 1871, actually the same year that Marcel Proust was born, and he was thus 4 years older than Thomas. He quit attending the gymnasium in Lübeck in 1889 and apprenticed as a bookseller. A year later, in 1890, he started an internship at Fischer Verlag, which of course was then the most significant publisher of modern literary fiction. And he took courses at this time also, although he didn't have the Abitur, at the University of Berlin. But mostly, Heinrich Mann lived the life of a bohemian, indulging in his senses and enjoying the ladies. Like Arthur Schnitzler in Vienna, he loved women and women loved him. Heinrich Mann's relationship to his sexuality was as liberal and easy as Thomas Mann's relationship was pinched and difficult. We've already discussed that when we were discussing Tod in Venedig. In 1891, after their father's death, Heinrich decided that he was going to be a writer. In 1893, he moved to Munich, where his mother and sisters had established themselves. Heinrich now began writing in earnest. A year later, his mother financed the publication of his first novel. In 1895 and 1896, Heinrich was the editor of a culturally very conservative, maybe even nationalist magazine, which was called Das 20. Jahrhundert, the 20th century. In 1896, Heinrich and Thomas took off for Rome, where they lived together for a while. They had quarters together, but since they had rather different sexual needs, they decided to split and establish their own quarters, saying, of course, that they needed quiet to work. Heinrich was producing yet another satirical novel. It's called Im Schlaraffenland, criticizing social conventions in Wilhelminian Germany, while Thomas was working away at Stories and at Buddenbrooks, which was published in 1901 and became an enormous success. Heinrich Mann was well known around 1901, but at that time, when after Buddenbrooks was published, Thomas became definitely famous. Not until 1904 did Heinrich publish a significant work of his own, Professor Unrat oder das Ende des Tyrannen. Professor Unrat, you can, this pun in this word, or the end of a tyrant, which in 1930, of course, became The Blue Angel, starring Marlene Dietrich and Emil Jannings, who also has a couple of brown stains on his acting career. Professor Unrat was Heinrich Mann's first foray into analyzing this sadomaso, you could say, sadomasochistic mentality of those who crave to exert power, but in order to be fulfilled must be dominated by others. At the center of Professor Unrat are the structures of sexual power, but at the center of the novel we'll be discussing today, the Untertan, are the social and political dynamics of power, which Mann argues have their roots in social conditioning. In 1906, 2 years after finishing Professor Unrat, Heinrich Mann saw that he needed to write another book about the average New German, den durchschnittlichen Neudeutschen. As he wrote in a letter in October 1906 to a close friend of his, Ludwig Evers. In 1907, he was hard at work and he visited a paper factory in Munich. But it was not until 5 years later, in 1911, that he was ready to publish sections from the book. So while Heinrich was analyzing the beer hall Germans, you might say, Thomas at the same time, 1911, you remember what he was writing, and was indulging in fantasies of loving boys and decaying nicely in Venice. The first excerpts of Der Untertan appeared in Munich's magazine Simplicissimus, a satirical magazine that attacked both the clergy and Kaiser Wilhelm II, number 2, Kaiser Wilhelm II. As the book was nearing completion, which was in early 1913, Heinrich Mann had a hard time finding a magazine that was going to serialize the entire text. In March 1913, he finally reached a deal with the weekly Zeit in Bild, but had to agree to take out some of the erotic scenes and to tone down the attacks on the Kaiser. In January 1914, the novel started serialization. On June 28, the successor of the Habsburg Empire was assassinated in Sarajevo, and on August 1st, 1914, the German army was being mobilized. A few days later, Heinrich Mann received a letter from his publisher that indicated that they had to stop serialization because in those times, with censorship now kicking in, the magazine could not afford to run this novel, and serialization stopped with episode 32. This was on August 13th. Episode 32 was the trial of Buch Senior against, what was he being tried for? I forget now, it's at the very end, against Volksstimme. I'm sorry, Majestätsbeleidigung? Is also Majestätsbeleidigung?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, it's completely slipped by me. Okay, so with that episode, at the very end, basically when Hessling wants to finish him off and puts him on and organizes this trial, that is when serialization stopped. And in that very month, I think a few days later, Heinrich Mann got married to Maria Canova, a Jewish actress from Prague, of whom the family did not approve. And actually, they had the only child he had was Leonie, who was the daughter of Maria Canova. As the Germans were wreaking havoc on the Eastern Front, the Russian translation of Der Untertan appeared in full in St. Petersburg. As I said earlier, this was in 1915, and one does wonder what the Russians made of it. In Germany, however, Mann was without a publisher, but he was in luck. The incredible Kurt Wolff, who had published, as you remember, Kafka's Metamorphosis in 1915, and who had actually been drafted to serve in the army alongside his best editor, Franz Werfel, was signing Heinrich Mann on. So Kurt Wolff in very early 1916 became Heinrich Mann's publisher. In May 1916, Wolff agreed to print 10 copies of the book and the novel, because he couldn't print more because of censorship issues, and this 10 copies, I'm going to read those names to you later. Those 10 copies, we have the list to whom they were distributed, and they were actually all people who were aristocrats or who were in the army. I'm actually going to read those names to you, page 243. At least I need my glasses because it's very small print. You see, I'm getting really old. In order to read the small print, I have to read the glasses. Okay, so the 10 people who received these copies were also it's a very interesting list. If you think about who got what is in the book. Okay, so the people who got the 10 copies were Ernst Ludwig, Großherzog von Hessen und bei Rhein, Karl Paust, Fürstin Mechilde Lichnowsky, Oberstleutnant im Generalstab Madlung, Helene von Nostitz-Wallitz, that's a friend of Rilke's, Jesko von Puttkammer, Peter Reinhold, Fürst Günther zu Schönburg-Waldenburg, Joachim von Winterfeld, Elisabeth Wolfmerk. Quite a list. Fürstin, quite a list. Okay, quite a list. So those 10 people were the ones who got the 10 copies of Der Untertan.
Who decided on that list?
Heinrich Mann. Heinrich Mann. So well connected, you could say. All right, so the book, and then as censorship was lifted in December 1918, the book would finally appear in Germany, and within 6 weeks it sold 100,000 copies. Of course, you can imagine that Heinrich Mann was attacked very fast. The novel was not that well received for aesthetic reasons. So Kurt Tucholsky was one of the ones who praised it, and on the other hand, it was very criticized. He was criticized for aesthetic reasons, criticized, of course, for social reasons. He was attacked to such a degree that he even became, he got death threats. So, but it really, Heinrich Mann was not faced. As the fatherland lay in shreds and the Weimar Republic arrived, Heinrich Mann emerged as the most insightful critic of Wilhelminian Germany and a novelist who held up a mirror to its ugly imperial face, while Thomas Mann, of course, was now burdened with his torturous 600-page Wapa Betrachtungen eines Unpolitischen that had been his effort to serve his country with his pen during the war. His major enemy had actually been his Frenchified brother Heinrich. Frenchified, not in language and behavior, mind you. No one was more German than the bearded and pot-belly inclined Heinrich, but Frenchified as a literary mind. A Boulevard-Moralist, that is what Thomas called him, und ein Bummelpsychologe. And thus he was the enemy of the true German culture of self-discipline, self-denial, and perfect form that Thomas Mann was championing. The hostility between the two brothers probably dates back to rivalries in their childhood, but it broke out in full force for the first time in 1903 when Thomas Mann wrote a poisonous letter to Heinrich in which he ripped to shreds Heinrich's first novel, his new novel, Die Jagd nach Liebe. After years of feeling second to Heinrich, Thomas, buoyed by the recent success of Buddenbrooks, finally let fly. Heinrich was hurt, but willing to be generous, and their differences were cooking along on a very low flame for the next 11 years. But in November 1914, they flared up again. In September 1914, Thomas Mann wrote a letter to Heinrich in which he spoke favorably about den großen, grundanständigen, feierlichen Volkskrieg. That is in a letter. So about the great, fundamentally decent, and even festive People's War. That's in a letter, September 1914. That is what Heinrich got in the mail. Thomas was unable to resist the manly sexiness of the young war. He published, again, 2 essays. That was in November 1914. He published 2 essays, one entitled Gute Feldpost, and the other was published Gedanken in Kriege, Thoughts in War, in which he constructed a cultural, philosophical basis for the necessity of that war. As usual, Thomas was operating with opposites. On the one hand, there was Deutsche Kultur, German Kultur, and on the other hand, French Civilisation. These countries, of course, France and Germany, were then at war and were mortal enemies, and they had been mortal enemies, you could say, since the Germans humiliated the French in 1871, but before that, of course, the Russians had been humiliated by Napoleon, so it basically goes all the way back. But at this point, 1871, that was really a clincher when I think the emperor was crowned in Versailles, yes? Okay, so, all right, so Kultur, Thomas Mann wrote, was Geschlossenheit, Stil, Form, Haltung, Geschmack und irgendeine gewisse geistige Ordnung in der Welt. So Kultur is, as Thomas Mann defines it, is Geschlossenheit. That means a certain consistency within itself. Geschlossenheit, Stil, style, form, specific form, Haltung. Comportment. Basically a kind of self-discipline. You don't let on. Und Geschmack. That's, taste, a refined kind of taste. So kind of elegance and self-control. You can see here all the values that Thomas Mann stands for and that we discussed when we discussed Tod in Venedig. Und irgendeine gewisse geistige Ordnung in der Welt. Geistige Ordnung in der Welt.
Spiritual.
Yeah, geistig. Okay, this word geistig, it's a problem, right? But there is an arrangement in the world that is intellectual, theoretical. I think that what he means is not the esprit, because now you will see that this is what he associates with France, but it is intellectual, Kantian. in a certain way. Okay, so, and in contrast to this, there was Zivilisation, which was Vernunft, Aufklärung, and now there come two words which I have no idea what he means. Vernunft, Aufklärung, Sänftigung, Sittigung, Skeptisierung, Auflösung und Geist. Okay, Vernunft is easy, Raison, that's reason, Aufklärung, enlightenment, Sänftigung, making things soft, making things tender, making things sensual. Sittigung, a kind of moral attitude that goes with a certain sensuality. It's not a word that we know in German or now use. Skeptisierung, making things, asking, Dinge hinterfragen, being skeptical about things. Auflösung, now things fall apart. And Geist. Geist. Okay, now you have esprit in the sense that Geist is cultivated by Voltaire. What Thomas Mann was picking up here in this essay, in Gedanken im Krieg, was a characterization of French culture that Heinrich Mann had offered with a positive valuation in his 1910 essay, Geist und Tat. The brothers were always reading each other. So now we are back to, so what he's using here, this Auflösung und das Geist, was actually proposed in a positive way by Heinrich 4 years earlier in this essay, Geist und Tat, in which Heinrich, counterpoised Voltaire and Goethe, calling Voltaire political and Goethe moral, in a pinch kind of way. Thomas replied in the fall of 1914 by contrasting Voltaire not with Goethe, but with Frederick the Great, who was driven by heroic duty. So it's different if you counterpoise Voltaire with Goethe and say he is moral, or if you counterpoise Voltaire with Frederick the Great, who does things heroically, who discharges his heroic duty. To mind comes a sentence by Hessling, who says, Deutsch sein ist eine Sache ihrer selbst willen tun. To be German is to do a thing for its own sake. There are inflections here, of course, of Frederick the Great. Heinrich had written Geist und Tat in 1910, in part, and now we go back again, as a reaction to Thomas's rise to power and his cozying up to the cultural elite in 1901, after he had published Gutenberg's. Thomas wanted to be, and we've talked about that too, the representative German writer, the Nationaldichter, if you would like, if you could put it that way, and that unnerved Heinrich. So he remarked in Geist und Tat, and now comes the important sentence that defines Geist for him, ein Intellektueller, der sich an die Herrenkaste heranmacht, begeht Verrat am Geist, denn der Geist ist nichts Erhaltendes und gibt kein Vorrecht. Er zersetzt. Okay. Ein intellectual, der sich an die Herrenkaste heranmacht, that cozies up to the leading class, to the establishment, begeht Verrat am Geist, betrays Geist. Okay, but now that's just a word now. Now he's got to define what Geist is, okay? Because in this case it's not intellect. Denn der Geist ist nichts Erhaltenes. Geist is nothing that conserves. It does not grant you any privileges. Geist zersetzt. Geist takes apart. It analyzes, okay? It takes that down which is established by criticizing it. In this case, zersetzen means it's we come from it by the Nazis having used that term. For us, it's no longer neutral. But zersetzen here really means to take apart, to be analytical. So that is Voltaire's definition of what Geist is. Geist is, for Heinrich Mann, antithetical to power. Heinrich argued, and you have to think of book here. Remember book? Book's Geist. Book is the Geist, has this Geist, this esprit, and he is very witty, or the wit that zersetzt, that takes people down a peg. He's satirical. Book in his performance in the trial. So Geist, you would say, Heinrich Mann is argued, is the opposing force and in the opposition to power, and that is precisely where intellectuals had to be. Thomas, in 1914, did not agree and argued that intellectuals were non-political producers of moral culture. And that is the basis for the possibility of innere Emigration as we have it with Gottfried Benn. that it is possible for you to have a moral point of view that could be in opposition or in agreement with whatever it was, but was independent of politics. That is Thomas's position. And it took him, as you remember, a very long time after he was kicked out of Munich to come to the understanding that in this case for him that would mean not to return to Germany. And you remember that Hermann Hesse played a key role in persuading Thomas that he ought not to go back. Heinrich's essay, 1910 essay Geist und Tat, had been written in praise of French culture and French esprit. And when Thomas came out in 1914 to denigrate French civilization, Heinrich replied with an essay on Zola, published in 1915. It is one of the greatest literary portraits of all time and contains Heinrich Mann's theory what a social novel should be. It should convey a portrait of the soul of the time, of die Zeitseele. Ein Roman muss die Zeitseele darstellen. And it enables the reader to experience what it is to be a modern human being. Experience is a very soft word here. What Heinrich writes is miterleben. When you read a novel, you have to do miterleben, go with the flow, be part of the novel, and experience the time from the inside out. That is, in his definition, what a social novel should do. Heinrich Mann praises Zola's extraordinary humaneness, which led to his political engagement, not least for Alfred Dreyfus. Heinrich pairs Zola with Tolstoy. Years later, of course, Thomas would shoot back, and he would pair Tolstoy with Goethe. It was, however, specifically the second sentence in the Zola essay that pushed Thomas over the edge and into writing his hatred-filled Betrachtungen eines Unpolitischen, which are his defenses of German national culture and himself as a national writer. In later years, Heinrich Mann said lamely that he did not have Thomas in mind when he wrote that famous second sentence. Okay, now comes the second sentence that pushed Thomas over the edge. Sache derer, die früh vertrocknen, ist es schon zu Anfang ihrer 20er Jahre bewusst und weltgerecht hinzutreten. Those destined to dry up early will already at age 20 come on the scene self-aware and with their assessment of the world in place. There's no greater put-down of Thomas after Gutenberg's than this sentence. And Thomas saw it right away. That's the second sentence in the Zola essay. To dry out and to dry up had been Thomas's mortal fears ever since completing Gutenberg's in his early 20s. And there was no way Thomas Mann could not think that he was targeted, and he defended his position as a champion of moral couture on the 600 pages of Betrachtungen eines Unpolitischen, in which he also demolished his brother's Frenchified position. They did not speak for about 4 years, and they actually only reconciled sort of reconciled in 1922 when Heinrich went through a serious illness. Now, it is not hard to see, I think, that Der Untertan and Gutenberg's can be read as parallels to each other. Not parallels, but as dialogues. Okay, so that's my spiel. That's my offering to you, my Hanukkah gift to you. And now we need to do something with this novel. I think we do what we usually do. I'm just going to have you present your view and what you made of the book. And from that, we will see where we go with it. Because, I mean, it is not a difficult book. It is very smartly structured. And we'll see where it's going. So I'd just like to, this is my third time of reading the book, and I enjoyed it. And I really enjoyed it because it was so fun, so fast, and it was so not hard. But it was interesting. I laughed my head off at many scenes. It was very, very funny. It was better than I remembered it. Let me put it this way. All right. Now, okay, don't be shy. Philip, can I call on you to say something interesting?
I can only echo what you just said. I thought it was very funny.
It's very funny.
There were scenes where I really was laughing out loud. There's the scene where he's going to visit Von Vulcaut, and the dog and he are...
the scene with the dog when he's in Wilcox's office.
And
Oh, it is marvelous, yes.
And his
Yeah.
Augusta, you know, she's wonderful everywhere. Particularly when he translates into sexual terms, you know, the sadomasochistic relationship. I found that very funny. And then there are all these word plays.
The word plays and their leitmotifs with the kneeling. Of course, I was thinking of something quite different because I was thinking of you at Lohengrin.
Oh.
The Lohengrin scene. Okay, so of course it's a replique to Welsummenblut. Yeah, we were reading Welsummenblut, which was what 1905 or 1909 or something like that, where those two, Siegmund and Sieglinde, are going to the opera, and then after they end up on the Bärenfell at the end. And here we have this Lohengrin, and then afterwards they're talking about. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the iPad simply because I have the book on here, simply because I was highlighting it. And it is just, denn hier erschienen ihm in Text und Musik alle nationalen Forderungen erfüllt. Empörung war hier dasselbe wie Verbrechen, das Bestehende. Legitime war gleich glanzvoll gefeiert, auf Adel und Gottesgnadentum der höchste Wert gelegt und das Volk ein von den Ereignissen ewig schlug sich willig gegen die Feinde seines Herrn. It's absolutely marvelous.
There are two things about that scene I just maybe would throw in. One is I love that he's driven toward Elsa, the woman that's playing Elsa.
Yeah.
Who finds her
Yes,
so attractive.
who of course is Jewish,
And
right?
she's Jewish and she's 40, and when he looks at her more closely with the opera glasses, she's not so lovely. And then at the end, he's so taken with the opera, he says to Gustav, "Oh, I have to write Wagner and tell him that this is just the greatest thing ever." And she says, "Gee, I think you're a little too late for that."
That's right. So he said, well, he had to. It's in the formulation in which he says it. Not that it is too late, but she was very subtle about it because she didn't really put him down. But what is absolutely astounding after this is when he's categorizing art. Einmal auf so hohem Gedankenflug begriffen, I'm sorry, I'm apologizing to those who don't have access to the German, äußerte sich Dietrich über die Kunst im Allgemeinen, since he was already up in flights of fancy, in flights of intellect, so Dietrich was talking about art in general. Unter den Künsten gibt es eine Rangordnung, there's a ranking, this is like if you would say today ranking among the arts. Die höchste Kunst, the highest art is Musik, daher ist es die deutsche Kunst. The highest form of art is music, and therefore it is the German art. Dann kommt Drama. Warum? Fragt Gustav, so why? Asked Gustav, why afterwards the drama? Weil man es manchmal in Musik setzen kann und weil man es nicht zu lesen braucht und überhaupt. Because it can be set to music and you don't really have to read it and so on. Und was kommt danach? And what comes afterwards? Die Porträtmalerei natürlich. And after that comes the painting of portraits. Wegen der Kaiserbilder, because of the portraits of the Kaiser. Das Übrige ist nicht so wichtig. The rest isn't that important. Und der Roman, dazu Gustav sagt, and the novel, der ist keine Kunst. Wenigstens Gott sei Dank keine Deutsche. Das sagt schon der Name. Such as for you. And the novel, der Roman, oh, that's not art. Not at least a German art. You can tell from the name. Roman, okay? I mean, you really can't beat this. So this is very funny. And I think in here actually you can see in the way that the novel is composed, that he was working on individual scenes and he was doing little vignettes, and in fact individual chapters were published. So what is the structure of were published independently and could be enjoyed independently? And the writing is very funny. It's very close, it's very colloquial German. It is not tortured in the way that Thomas's German is tortured. That one doesn't feel that he had to sit down and look for le mot juste and was like losing sleep over not having put the right word. Yet at the same time, you could see that the leitmotifs are worked out. It's sought out very carefully. The leitmotif of kneeling down that is repeated in the Lohengrin scene. You could see that it is well sought out because Agnes at the beginning finds the counterpart at the very end. And in fact, I would say that Dietrich's treatment or dealing or relationship with Emmy, which turns very suddenly, is one of the good points about him. Maybe the one redeeming moment that is in the book, that he recognizes that he is capable of feeling because he recognizes his own humiliation and Agnes's humiliation, that the one that he caused her, and is not putting his own sister through that. Yes, he cannot diminish the pain that she's suffering by having been ditched by this Leutnant von Blitzen, but he can at least save her from the humiliation of having to go and stand outside his window in the rain. And therefore he gives her a place of honor, and she becomes the Teedame, and she does the salon, and she has a good time with books. So they are esprit, they represent the esprit, and he's tolerating that. So I guess that is a redeeming moment for him. Okay, but your readings. Yes?
I have more of a question than a reading. As I read this, or I approached it as, I assumed it was going to be political satire, okay? Mm-hmm. And certainly there is a great deal of satire in it, but the satire is so thinly veiled that it's almost an historical novel in a fun way.
Yes.
It's not subtle satire at all. But my question is really, how would this may be with hindsight that we see this as rather unsubtle satire. How would it have been seen at the time?
It was seen as satire. I mean, Kurt-Tucholsky, who was one of the earliest reviewers, saw it immediately as satire. But it is true, it is almost too realistic to be a satire. But of course, scenes the one that I just read about the Lohengrin are clearly comical and are clearly satirical, because that is obviously not the way theater goers react, but maybe they do. I mean, we can no longer assume this, and that is because to some degree we are not coming to this novel neutrally anymore, because we do come to it after 1933 to 45, and it is. I have to really catch myself to not think of Hitler when I'm reading about Hessling. It is difficult to do that, and it interferes all the time. But one does have to put it before one's eyes that Hitler was not known. You know, there was no Hitler when this novel was published, and yet now we are almost forced to see it through that lens. And that is how good Heinrich Mann's observations of the society were, that we can recognize this as true. Back then, one might have said this is satire, yes, because people didn't really understand what the consequences of this kind of mentality would be. But for us, we hesitate to call it satire because, unfortunately, we've been taught there are tremendous consequences when people like this come to power, and that there's a reality that actually people like this really do exist. And therefore, we are now tend to say, well, it's not satire. That's at least would be my answers. Any?
Well, that's why I couldn't find it so funny. I saw the funniness, but basically I was very sad reading this book because of how he dissects the society, and
it is uncanny. The precision with which he dissects society is extraordinary. And once you start making, as always, making a diagram, I have to keep track of things. So I just try to figure out who is organized how and what is the center of the book. You realize how constructed it is, because the figures are not cartoons. Yes, there are caricatures. That was always what is used. It's a caricature rather than a full-blown satire. But at the same time, they're also well-rounded characters. If you take Pastor Zillich, the Reverend Zillich, with the daughter who becomes a prostitute, yes, it's an exaggeration that you should give the person who becomes a courtesan, the village prostitute, kitchen, ultimately to the pastor. But yes, there is a trajectory. Too much repression, gets you to go the other way. We recognize this to some degree as true, and that's why we cannot call it a satire. But it might be good to think about, if you think about what I gave to you as a Gedanken experiment. If you think about the Untertan as a contrast to Buddenbrooks, and I know it's been a while that we read the book, but we did read it. Why can I say that? What works about that? Or does it not work? What works about this conceit? Maybe you tell me, yeah, of course, it's about this social novel and poem, therefore you can say it. Yes.
But, Buddenbrook seems to is carried by this idea that individual human development is still possible.
Yes.
In the social context.
Right.
And,
right.
In Untitled, that social context that informs human development is lacking.
Right. Okay, so it's a contrast. So it's a counter argument that Heinrich makes. So if Thomas Mann puts emphasis on the development, the intellectual, moral, and so on development of the individual over and against society, then Heinrich Mann says, well, excuse me, there's no such freedom. There might be such freedom for the people like the Vulkovs who are like out there on their estate, and he would have the opportunity to do so because his education opportunities. But when you are a cog in the wheel, or when you are somebody from the lower middle class, you don't have that opportunity, or you are pushed. You could say that. Right. Now, your question is a smart one because it goes. I'm sorry that I said that. I didn't mean it that way. I'll take it back. Yeah. Your question is smart in a way that it gets us further because there's a follow-up question. But what are the forces that prevent? Right. That is the follow-up question.
Right. Well, that's
what are the question? What are the forces? What exact forces are the ones that produce a character like Hessling? That is the question that needs to be asked. And if we recognize this, well, then the next thing would be for us, well, what can we do to act against it? Well, we can already have Thomas Mann novels. Then once you get people to read Thomas Mann novels, that would be obviously the cure. Nobody who understands a Thomas Mann novel would end up like a Hessling. All right, you could say this kind of works, and Thomas Mann comes out triumphing. Let me ask you, let me push a little bit more on the Buddenbrook parallel thing. Okay, so we have a contrast: individualism, social conditioning. Okay, determinism and freedom. Although one wonders, and I want to just remind you that the Buddenbrook has a huge component of Schopenhauer.
Yes,
how free is Consul Thomas Buddenbrook? Yes. And is it not so that this is a novel of inevitable decline, that even someone as supposedly free as Consul Buddenbrook cannot stop? So here too, so you have a novel, you would agree with that, of decline, yes? Yeah. In Buddenbrook's. Okay, so you have a novel of decline, and at the center of the family that is going down are the Buddenbrooks. They're going down. So, and who's going up? You see, that's what Thomas Mann left out. Hagenström. Very good. There is a family, and those are the people who are going to the Alps, while Thomas and actually Tony Moore, Hagenström, those guys on the way up. Okay. Now, you have the same dynamism, the same one, exact same one, at the core, at the center of Untertan. And lo and behold, it's the same initials. Okay, so we have Buch is going down, and Hessling is going up. That is the dynamism here. And in fact, very interesting. Okay, so they go up, and in fact, we have our old book is an 1848er. What does the 1848 stand for?
For the rebel.
For the parliamentary revolution, you could say, for the beginning of democracy, for opposition to, a very related opposition to the Vienna Congress of 1815, opposition to monarchy, wanting to have parliamentary representation, and all of that. Okay, so the old classic liberalism. So now that is at the center of the book, the center of the book. Okay, you have Hessling on the one hand. And who's his opponent then? Not the old book, but Wolfgang. Yeah, so you have Wolfgang. And now here, so what do these people, what are the two people, if you really think about them, now you gotta go forget the Hitler connection for right now. Just look at Hessling through the lens of Hagström. Look at Hessling and Book through the lens of Buddenbrooks. What does each of them have going for themselves, if anything? I mean, Hessling has real things going for him. He's energetic. He gets things done. He does build up a business. No. He is a real motor, and it is true, he does employ people. There is an energy and a dynamism that is economic. He's an economic engine. He does get things done, just in the way Hagström gets things done. You don't have to agree with that this is a good thing, but it is...
He has no scruples.
I'm sorry?
He has no scruples.
No scruples, no remorse, no nothing. Is an opportunist? Absolutely. But he does get things done. And now comes the question, what is then, okay, when you see this, and Book sees this, okay, so we have three, the novel is very simply structured. You have chapter 1 is his socialization, chapter 2 is socialization in love, chapter 3 is a return to Netzig, is the return and our introduction to the society there. Those are the first 3 introductory chapters, and of course in that first introductory chapter you already have the core of the next chapter, which is the Majestätsbeleidigung of Lauer. Okay, this provocation. So that's the first 3, and then you have the second 3 sets, and the second 3 sets are analytical of the time, but in a certain way. You first have the Prozess, the trial. Then you have the theater, the theater performance. Okay, so if you just put them here. So first you have the trial in court. Then you have the theater performance where he talks politics. And then the last one is politics and economics. Yes, you have the politics. You have the Wahl, the election. If you think about American elections, okay, you can see the connection here. It's a theater too. And you have in all of this the theater metaphor. And to that we are introduced through this guy. Okay, so what then, in Heinrich Mann's opinion, and I'm going to go not just say this, is the failure of the intellectuals?
They don't stand up to power.
He has the power. If you think back, and this is it's the central scene. He is a lawyer. He works with language. What?
They don't stand up to power.
He does stand up, and he almost wins. You know, at the very end, when he gives his plaidoyer, okay, he is at the brink. He can feel the court. He can feel the audience has shifted. He can feel that people are now ready to acquit this Lauer. And to be down on this Hessling, and then what happens? And he articulates that. He gets carried away by his own vanity, and he makes this into a performance, and that's the moment he loses them. Do you not remember? Do you remember that? Okay. So that what is happening here is that he doesn't care about results. He cares about the aesthetic performance of what he does. And at this point, he is checked out. That is Heinrich's criticism of Thomas. That you check out from the stage. That in fact, yes, maybe it isn't so beautiful, but it's got to be effective because you've got a political job to do, which is you've got to establish justice. Now let me remind you of a novel that we also read, and that was written in 1925. At the center of which is a trial.
Berlin Alexanderplatz?
That's also good, but that's different. Feuchtwanger.
Oh,
Now I'm looking on that. It's not
Der
Faust.
Volk. Der Volk.
Der Volk. What is the success? Because I'm already thinking about power, which is the other book. Der Volk. At the center of which is the trial of someone who had put the wrong picture in the art museum. And we could see how this is a miscarriage of justice because of the politicization of the people who are involved, because of opportunism and nepotism. And it is in fact stunning to see how very similar, and in fact I should probably have looked at what Feuchtwanger owes, the later novel, owes to Heinrich Mann. But so it's a similar structure. So we can see that on this one, here we have vanity, and he actually defines the intellectual of the time as what? And that is the key word, and that's why the intellectuals are out of power. Actors. Actors, okay? Actors. And you could argue, for the pleasure of it, and that he switches from law to acting and back to law is deliberate on Heinrich Mann's part. Yeah.
Can I just say one thing about the energy?
You can say many things.
That Hessling shows, you know, that he's such an energetic character.
Yeah.
At heart, he is a better actor than any of the people.
Good, thank you very much, because that's not the only actor. Absolutely.
He's a fraud. But by acting a certain way, I think ultimately he comes to believe his own baloney.
We all become the pose we strike. Yes.
And he, I mean, despite the fact that I found the novel very funny, I also found it very scary.
Oh, yes.
It's so reminiscent of, I hope I'm not offending anybody, things that have happened in recent political administrations in this country, where people who never served in the military were very happy to send people off to be fighting wars in places we didn't belong. And that reminded me very much of Hessling, who was a failure as a soldier, but who carries on as if he was, you know, God's gift to...
Lying is part of the deal. I mean, he is a total fraud, and he knows it. And in fact, his very weakness is something that he wants to overcome. He is pushing so hard on others, and this is especially true in the case of the women, because he doesn't want to be like them. I mean, he has contempt for people who are weak because he feels he's too much like them. This comes out especially in the early chapter, chapter 1, in the relation to his mother. He has contempt for her. And at the same time, okay, when he is not happy if he's the only one in power, he too needs to have a power over him. Okay, so that when so in the power structure, the guy who's actually in the end, not going at the very end, over him is Hulko. There's a whole slew of aristocrats in their own little planet over there, and above Hulko, of course, is the Kaiser. And above the Kaiser, this is the last chapter now when we get the monument is being exposed, which is a wonderful scene with the rainstorm coming in and the flashing lightning. And up, of course, up there we have God. Okay, so God, Kaiser, Hulko, and then it's already Hessling. Okay, so when there is a possibility of unseating Hulko, he's unhappy that he might succeed, and he's in fact relieved when it turns out that Hulko cannot be unseated. I don't pronounce it W because I think so there's Hulkov and there's Hulko. So if I said Hulkov, it would be from Russian, but Hulko would be the pronunciation that in Brandenburg and in Prussia would be used. So you don't pronounce the W. So Hulko stays firmly in place, and along with him, and in fact all the other. It's interesting that he's of course married to a Gräfin. Okay, into the old Prussian class, who is a writer. And there's another very good scene, and here's another against Thomas, who's of course plagiarizing die natürliche Tochter, Goethe's natürliche Tochter. And of course, it's not, basically you never heard of that. Another really funny scene. When they are putting this play on, it is satirized, and now again here satirized to feature the Hessling family, who want so much to be like aristocrats, but who would be seen eating with a knife and all of that. So there's a very funny scene. So you have that. You have the aristocrats, okay, so over here, and they are, in fact, you could think back to the Sternheim play, they are what is not seen. We don't get that much insight of what the shenanigans are there. We know they're landed, they're in the east, and they're somehow connected to the industrial military complex. So the military, high industry, high finance, landed gentry, and strong connections to the Kaiser are symbolized by the aristocrats. And what makes Hessling into the subject he is is, and he says this when he talks about his ideas of what a drama should be about, he wants that to remain in place. He wants, when he describes what he likes about drama, he wants, even when he says, "Oh, I'm so sorry," that Goethe makes the aristocrat marry the piano teacher, and the other guy marries the, and so the two aristocrats at the end of the play, the lady aristocrat marries the piano teacher, and the son aristocrat marries the factory owner's daughter. And he's very unhappy about that, because he would have liked, he says, the two aristocrats to get married to aristocrats, even if it means they're poor, because that's what he believes in, that every stand, every estate, every layer of society should remain as it is. That is your fundamental conservative mentality. That they want it to be like this, and he feels satisfied. And he doesn't care if they don't have any money, because that's what they got the blue blood for. Of course, that's not Woolco's idea. And he knows Hessling, in reality, it is actually quite different. Now, you do have an opposing force to Woolco, and that is, and he's even got the right name to be opposing the aristocrats, Napoleon Fischer. What a name. Okay, so you got here your Napoleon Fischer. Now tell me about Fischer. Napoleon Fischer, and why is he called Napoleon? Okay, and he would be the natural counterforce who is subversive, and he was part of the SPD, Social Democrats. Napoleon Fischer, of course, Napoleon is the one who rises up and he overthrows the old aristocrats, and Bonn, of course, puts himself into the place of the aristocrats. So what's with Napoleon? And that is actually, and here we have political criticism, not so much a satire, because in 1892, during those times, in chapter 1, while he studies in Berlin, the demonstration of the workers really took place. Okay, that was in 1892, we know February 25, 1892, and after it was all over, the Kaiser came out on his horse and he pretended like he had been beaten on all of these guys. Okay, and now was the question of what was the SPD, there wasn't any SPD, but what would the Social Democrats be doing? And the Social Democrats actually went along. They were arguing in their papers that this wasn't really a workers' demonstration at all, that this was just some anarchists who had incited the workers to riot, that this was not, and it had anything to do with the Social Democrats, so they did not capitalize on the courage that the workers had actually shown. And that was interpreted as, by Heinrich Mann and by many, many others, as a failure of nerve. And in fact, when you remember these workers' demonstrations, one of the key elements is there, that there are instances of anti-Semitism in it. Okay, so one Jew gets beaten up, and in fact, in 1892, during that demonstration, first they were calling a Arbeit und Brot, and then they went off and looted the Jewish stores. So the element of anti-Semitism was part of the mob even at that time, and that is another element that Heinrich Mann brings in. The role of the Jews in this book is very interesting. Okay, so it's like the fourth night of Hanukkah, or fifth night of Hanukkah, so we'll talk a little bit about the Jews. Okay, but let's talk about this Napoleon Fischer a little bit before. So Napoleon Fischer is an opportunist just like anybody else. He should be the one who would be opposed to the landed gentry, and he should be the one who would be agitating for the redistribution of wealth, and he should be the one to agitate for a revolution, but he's hand in glove and is corrupted by the capitalist himself. So this guy is actually of no help. And then there is, and this is in the hierarchy, then is here the Alte Buch, who stands for the only part of real democracy for 1848, but he's of course completely inefficient. And he's usually treated as the one, or we critics say that he's the one positive character in the book. I actually don't find him positive at all. I find him almost a liability, because he has lost his critical edge, that he cannot see through Hessling. That is a real failure. So what Heinrich Mann is criticizing here, in fact, is the romanticization, the romantic ideas, the idealism of that group that cannot see hard reality. Because what you need in a situation like that is clear-sightedness, and book doesn't have that. In fact, there really isn't a single positive character in this book. Let's talk a little bit. Yeah, I want to talk about the women and I want to talk about Jews. Let's take the Jews first because they're so interesting. They're so fascinating. So it's there's a couple of them. There's two of them. Well, we can actually just finish. So we can actually just finish the social sketch. So you could say then on the other hand here you could have all the different women. How many women out there? What do they represent? And then down here is his society. We can do that, and we have the whole society on the board that he has. The women. Okay, so there's the mother, okay, weak, and he has contempt for her, but he allows, I mean, she has got it tough with them, because he allows her sometimes to have bösartige Szenen, but she's a very weak and exploited character, but, you know, she's also conducive to that. I mean, she's uneducated. Not one girl in the educated or has an education. But although there's a little bit pushback from the sisters, so it's the mother, and then there's the sisters, and there's two of them. There's Emmy and Magda, and of course there's issues with marriage, and that's an interesting thing. The pushback with marriage. The sisters do push back against Hässling in a certain way. I think it's Emmy more than Magda, but Magda also. They say, you know, what are our chances? And sometimes Hässling goes around and is puzzled by what these young women are all about. And he says, yeah, you know, what do they have in life? They've got to go sit home. They can't go out. They have no way of actually realizing themselves. They've got nothing. It's actually very interesting. In Boccaccio's De Camerone, at the very beginning, Boccaccio, this is not 1350, right? It's a little bit earlier, has the same observation, and he feels sorry for the ladies because when they are upset or when they have to suffer from melancholy and from the woes of love, which is really what this is all about, they can't go out hunting, they can't go do anything, they have to sit home, and as a remedy, as a therapy, he was writing all these body stories in order so that they too would have an outlet. Okay, so but these guys, and so the preface to the Decameron is fantastic to argue that literature has the function of dissipating your sexual energies and to heal your love sickness. And so Boccaccio is very, very clever about that. But these two ladies don't even have that. They really have nothing. And so it is understandable that, you know, they are having affairs. And so Magda finally gets married, and that gives a great triumph over her sister. And Emmy has this affair with this lieutenant, which of course comes to no good end. Now, having talked about the sisters, there's Kätchen and there's Gusta, and they are a doppelpack. Yeah, they are similar. They are mirror images of it. Everything always comes like in twos with him. So like Emmy and Magda, because they form a nice contrast. And then there is Gusta and Kätchen, and they are similar. They look similar. They have similar sexual appeal to him. And one becomes a wife, and the other becomes a prostitute. Because I mean, obviously, can marry only one. But they are, which goes to show that to some degree, even the wives are only prostitutes because, you know, ultimately they've got to go marry for the money. So there are some sexual arguments made here that are, you know, they are Freudian and they are part of the social mores at the time, and it's not good for women. And Hässling, to his credit, understands that. And of course, Hässling has relationship with Goethe. He and Jadason go frequent Kätchen. In fact, Jadason, that's not a funny thing, figures out how he cannot contribute to that. So it's the other people in the town who set her up. And he has this nice little wife. And so the sexuality takes place with Kätchen, and Gusta just gets a little piece of that because her job, of course, is to produce children, which she does. Not too many, it's only 3, so I wonder why she stops at 3, but she has these 3 children. And then there is Agnes, of course. So none of these women really are very strong characters, and they stay on the sideline. But what happens, what we can see are the psychological disposition of Hässling. And then there's the last group of people are the people that he wants to win for the Kaiserpartei. Okay, so now he comes to and he says, no, we really need to build up the Kaiserpartei, the national movement, and his friends are well, who's in the Wirtshaus? Kühnchen, okay. Kühnchen, so he stands for the school. Kunze stands for the army. Zilich stands for the church. So you really got them up. We're missing one. We got the Schule, the Kirche, and the Bürgermeister, who is of course a nothing. The Bürgermeister basically sits between all of these. So that is
Yadason.
Yeah, and now come the Jews, and they can't be fit anywhere. Okay, so Yadason, so we have the church, the army, and the school. Those are the three pillars. Those are the three pillars through which obedience is disseminated. Those are the pillars that socialize society. Because that is where the kids are going. You're going to the school, you're going to the army, and in fact, if you're looking at the socialization that Hessling went through, he goes through the same thing. He has an authoritarian father at home, then he goes to the school where he is beaten and he beats back. Then he goes to the Studentenverbindung. Yeah, what is that in English?
Fraternity?
Fraternity, but it's not American fraternities aren't as vicious as that. They are?
Back in the old days, of course.
Back in the old days? Okay, Skull and Bones
Before
or
our
something.
time, right?
Okay, all right. Anyway, so with the Schmisse and all that, but as we know, and as you pointed, and then he goes to the army, but as we realize, he is one who is like a slippery eel. He manages to get out of that. And as you pointed out, Philip, he's a fantastic actor because all his life he gets through, finesses through, finagles his way through without having to wear the coat. And at the same time, he holds up that is the primary responsibility, that producing soldiers for and serving the country and all of that. Okay, now what about the interesting question of the Jews? So, we forgot the counterparty, the ones who are against that, the alten Liberalen, who are part of the book party. There's Heuteufel, who is the doctor, and there's only one other guy, Kohn, who has a department store. Okay, who's also assimilated, but he is part of the old, German Jewish assimilated group, the ones who were there in 1848 and who became German for all the cultural, political, right reasons, leaving Judaism behind and wanting to be part of the culture of the Dichter und Denker, where civilization and freedom and all of these values were celebrated. Someone's going back to Mendelssohn and then going on to the 1848, and it was a very strong group. Zentralverein der Juden in Deutschland, Central Organization of the Jews in Germany, has this history of 19th century liberalism, and that is represented by Kohn, and that would be represented by real people like Schocken, who had a department. So a little bit later in the 1920s, but there were many of them in Berlin, and they would be part of the Center Party, of the Zentrumspartei. Those would be those people, and then you have this very intriguing figure of Yadason, who is also funny, and that is actually an amazing thing. He's a caricature of a Jew, yes, because he even finesses out of having to pay for the prostitute, and at the same time, man nimmt es dem Heinrich Mann nicht übel. Yeah, there is nothing vile about the caricature, and he's got these ears. And they're always beautifully described, that the light falls from behind, probably like from my ears, when I'm saying like this, and they flame up red. And he has these ears, and he gets them fixed. He goes to Paris to get his ears fixed, because as you remember, when the play is on, the Natürliche Tochter Plagiat is on, he fails. And he fails because with such ears, you can't be an actor, but it's not the ears that the people are objecting to. What are they objecting to, and where does it come from? The audience objects to his shrillness, and the shrillness, there's the same. It functions basically in the same way. They all have an inferiority complex, and because he's got this inferiority complex, the both Hessling and basically everybody in this book, they have to overact. But Yadason is a counter. It could be a Jewish Hessling. We have to say it, unfortunately. Not that I like it, but we have our Hesslings too. And Yadason is one of them. And as soon as
he's an anti-Semite.
Sometimes he says.
Yeah, he's a Jewish anti-Semite. Sure, of course he is. Yeah, because the other guys make him feel bad. Of course he's an anti-Semite. But what is the cure? He gets his ears. His Jewishness is no longer so visible, and that makes him less self-conscious. And all of a sudden, he tones it down a little bit. And to the same degree, the same thing happens to Hessling. Actually, the more he becomes successful, the more he eases out. So that, in fact, we want to think about this, and you take it to first causes. What this is tremendous inferiority complex and feeling really bad about yourself and overcoming it by being violent to others. And the moment you are acknowledged, the moment people say, wow, you're really good, or you did this well, you ease out. It's that simple. You know, but with like tremendous consequences. This might be a very simplistic reading of this book, but there is a psychodynamic here that is true, which is why we don't read it as a satire, because we know Anerkennung. You know, this key word, Anerkennung. And we've had it a few times, and it is also in Fontane. When you are acknowledging your other as worthy, the other person chills out. The hostility is gone. You just say, okay. And you accept this person, say, I got to change this, that, the other thing, and you're not hostile, and that will do it. And that kind of success is given to Hessling at the end, and he chills out a little bit. I am not saying that that will make him into a good person. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that the shrillness is gone, and that it is shown in two ways, both with Yadason on the one side and with Hessling on the other side.
That's note caution.
Note caution, I forgot. Yes, note caution is like Yadason, okay? This is the counterplay. So Yadason is basically a free agent. He doesn't really belong to anyone. He is, you know, he's an opponent to book. He's an ally to Hessling. He frequents Gretchen. So it's a parallel. He's in many ways a parallel Hessling. And then there's note caution, who is of course the fourth état. He's the press. I forgot about the press. The school, the army, the church, and the press. The press, of course, should be independent, huh? Not happening. So, and of course, he's also in everybody's pocket. What one could discuss, and we're not discussing, although one could, is what is described and what is very often being said as one of the good points or excellent, I don't know, not good points of the novel, sharp points about the novel, that it anticipates Adorno's authoritarian personality. What it takes, and that there he had these nine, we could just do it as an experiment. He had these 9 characterizations of what it takes, and maybe you can work it out. What is the authoritarian personality? That this is the Autoritäre Persönlichkeit, who then becomes susceptible to fascism, who on the one hand wants to dominate others, and on the other hand must be dominated in order to be to feel himself or herself, I would say also, preserved inside a structure, and that will tamper down the insecurity. It is a matter of insecurity. If you feel that you are in a safe structure where everything is predictable, you yourself will feel secure. So not being accepted and feeling inferior and feeling insecure are part of the pathology that's at the core of that. So what would be, if you think about that, what would be some of the characteristics of this Autoritäre Persönlichkeit? What characterizes someone like Hessling?
Unscrupulousness.
Unscrupulousness? Yeah, he didn't say that, but that's okay. We'll do this. Okay, unscrupulous. Okay, so no remorse. It's actually not quite true. Unscrupulous, yeah, you could say that. Unscrupulous. But that, I would say, is not necessarily, I don't know, does it make one into a proto-fascist? I'm not sure, but it's possible.
Hypocrisy.
Hypocrisy?
I mean,
Let's just see what you think it is, okay?
Cowardice.
Cowardice. Okay.
Devious.
Obedience?
No, devious.
Or deviousness. I hope this is all spelled right.
Arrogance. Arrogance.
Arrogance. Very interesting.
Very domineering.
Domineering.
aggressive.
But
I would
only-
say I am not sure about domineering.
It's
Only
only
toward the
the
weak,
weak.
because toward Woodrow he
Yeah.
buckles, you know. It's sort of the Radfahrer. We had to sing the Radfahrerprinzip,
Genau.
ja?
Ja.
Nach oben buckeln und nach unten
Unten
treten.
treten.
So you bow down toward. It's like a bicycle. Imagine a bicyclist. You bow down toward the top and you pedal
You tread
on the bottom. You
the
tread on the bottom. Okay, so it's that. So in that sense, maybe only at home, because he can do it with impunity there, because that's where the wife is. Okay, other things.
Insecure.
Insecurity. Okay.
There's also
And then I'll give you the solution of what Adorno said.
there's a devotion to order above,
Yes.
above
Needs
individual
order.
relationships.
Needs order, that's good. Needs order. Okay, and that is, Adorno called that conventionality. Someone who's very conventional does not like the things that are new because they make him insecure. Yep. All right, I give you the solution and then we can all go home. Okay, so here's what Adorno said. The 9 characteristics of the authoritarian personality. Konventionalität, conventionality. Unterwürfigkeit, servility. Aggression, aggressiveness. Anti-intrazeption, meaning no introspection, lack of introspection. Aberglaube, superstition. Stereotypie, thinking in stereotypes. Machtdenken und Kraftmeierei, thinking in power structures and pretending that you are more powerful than you actually are. Destruktivität und Zynismus, I think that would go with hypocrisy and unscrupulousness and deviousness, destructiveness and cynicism. Und übertriebene Sexualität, an exaggerated sex drive. Very interesting thing of Elliot Spitzer. And people like him and Anthony Weiner and things. I don't know about this last part. Anyway,
Clinton.
I think we are on to Proust. Okay, that was fun to talk about, but Proust, that is, I mean, and I love Heinrich Mann, and I appreciate what he has done, and it is an extraordinary novel. But once you enter and take time with that, once you enter into Cambrai, it is a different world, and I think we will think back to Heinrich Mann and his appreciation of French civilization once we enter Proust.